Today we are very honored to have Steve Ramsdale from the Met Office. Steve is the Chief Operational Meteorologist in the Met Office. We have a few joint projects, and he will also be a member of the Leo Center for Environmental Intelligence. Now I will shut up and let Steve to present his excellent work. Thank you.
Getting up early in the morning to come here. I'm going to talk a bit about how I see AI being used in some specialist professions, particularly in the lens of meteorology, obviously that's my background. I am a Chief Operational Meteorologist at the Met Office. I know that doesn't mean a lot at the moment, and I'll explain a bit about what that actually means as we go through. I have also done a Data Science Masters with the University of Exeter, so it's Exeter's fault if I don't know what I'm talking about. We can fully blame them. But thanks to that, I'm also working on data science projects related to operational meteorology in the Met Office and thinking about how this is really going to affect particularly operational meteorology as we go forward into the future, how we can use AI to make sure that we are getting the most out of it and maintaining our trust and value in the Met Office. So the first bit is just a bit about weather forecasting, what it actually is and what we're actually trying to do. Effectively, it's quite a simple concept. We take the weather as it is now, and then we use physics to understand what's going to happen in the future. It sounds remarkably simple. Obviously, in reality, it's much, much more complex. There's such a variety of different things we need to talk about, and I'm sure you're aware of things about this. Things like resolutions, vertical and spatial, what sort of runtime do you want, when is it valuable to have, what sorts of parameterizations, fudge factors, I think sometimes called about, the parts of the atmosphere that we don't understand, and that there will always be uncertainty within that. So it's a very simple idea, but actually applying it in real life becomes much, much more complex. And the important thing here is we output a huge amount of data from our numerical prediction models, but data is not necessarily information. Data is just a lot of numbers. How does that actually come into something that's actually valuable for our end users to be able to make a decision based? And that is where operational meteorology comes in. It's that translation from data to a description, to what's going to happen. And the phrase that we start using now is towards actionable information. So saying the temperature outside is 12, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Obviously it's not 12, it must be more time. But how do we get from that to what does this actually mean for people downstream? What's actually that going to do to you? What's that going to mean for your life and business, for example? This is where we come back to what my role is as a chief meteorologist, because we're not the most well-known people. Meteorologists, everyone thinks they know what they do, but that's primarily because most of the time you see them on the telly standing in front of a nice map. But one core part of my role, and there's many versions of me, I should say, at the Met Office, because we run a shift roster, so there's always someone at work 24/7, 365. We are taking all of this data to try and understand what the impacts are going to be, particularly on the UK, but also worldwide as well. And the main focus of the Chief Operational Meteorologist is thinking about these national weather models. And we are in a fairly unique position. We're not the only people that do this, but we are world leaders in impact-based weather modeling. So we are looking at what does the weather mean for you as a person? What's going to happen as a result of that weather? So we issue rainfall warnings, or rainfall severe weather warnings, but it's not about how much rain is going to fall. It's about what is the impact of that going to be on life. Could there be flooding? And we work with partners to understand that, because we are not flooding experts, we are weather experts. So we bring that information in as we can. We think about wind. Is it going to affect power generation? Are we going to have frequent lightning? Is that going to affect power generation again? What is this all going to affect different forms of travel, for example? It's this sort of information we're bringing in. So, for example, 20 millimetres of rain in an hour over Cumbria might not matter really. That's fairly standard. It's a quite rural area. It's used to seeing large amounts of rain. That level of rainfall in the middle of London could have a lot of a different impact. And so we're starting to think about it, or we have been thinking about it for over 10 years now, in this impact space. And that's where we have our severe warnings, and we have something there called our impact matrix, which uses the likelihood of an impact versus the severity of an impact in order to decide on the coloration we may use. To do this, we take in all the data we can. We've got our weather models, we've got our observations, and we have to understand as well that our models, even when they've taken in these observations, they are not perfect. So we're then using those observations again to correct against the model. How has the model assimilated that data? What is it doing with that? Is there any assumption within the model that we then disagree with because of how it's developing things, and how have things started to go wrong? We're also looking at things like sensitivities. Talked about things like London versus Cumbria, but it could also be how much rain has fallen in recent days in this part of the country. Because then we know for flooding, for example, more likely to react quickly if you've had a wet few days. We also then create our narrative. What is likely to happen, both for the weather and for the impacts, but also what impacts may occur. It may be the case that we know it's frequent lightning and that's going to impact power, for example, and there's also this threat to life, because getting struck by lightning is generally held to be a bad thing. Not often people get superpowers from it, usually it just hurts. So we need to think about things in that, and what sorts of impacts are they going to be? Is it going to be that danger to life? Is it going to be travel impacts predominantly or probably? We need to think about all those. And one really important one as well is, where can it go wrong? So when we look at the weather in terms of the forecast and in terms of the impact, one of the first things we look at, and unfortunately it does mean sometimes meteorologists are a little bit in terms of doom makers, we're always looking for how could this go wrong and what are the impacts of that going on. It may be that it goes wrong and nothing happens and it's all well and good. That's one thing, but it could go wrong in another way and be very, very bad. We need to have that in the back of our mind. Then the most important part of all of this, which sometimes gets not thought about, is communicating that. There's no point in me knowing something I can't tell other people. And that's a really valuable part of all of this role, is to make sure that message gets out. And then just to blow my own trumpet, I was on shift last week and we had this situation go on over parts of the southeast where we issued an amber thunderstorm warning. So we don't do that very often because it's quite a severe impact, but we did have homes flooded and evacuated overnight in that area, houses struck by lightning, and more than 30,000 lightning strikes were recorded overnight. And it's that sort of thing we're trying to talk about. We had quite large yellow warnings in and around it. We then focused in and tried to communicate our message. And it's important there to think about, when we're communicating, we're talking about what's our best message to get out. So the weather is important, obviously there, but also what is our best message. And it was also, in this case, it was, this is the area most likely to see it. I may not have had exactly the confidence what we wanted to do that normally, but the important thing was, how do I communicate this to the public in the most effective way? Just to show, for example, these are some of the impacts we saw from, not from that warning, from the weather obviously, but you can see, what impact was really during the overnight period. And this is again where we start thinking about what happens. We have this idea of sometimes things are more impactful during the day because more people are around. Then there's a non-linearity to that. If it happens overnight, and suddenly you have to evacuate people, that's then more dangerous. There's this whole continuum of things that we have to think about, and there's where AI potentially is going to be the most helpful, because it can take all these data sources, it can try to make these decisions or help us make these decisions for us. One area where AI is being most used at the moment in weather, or I see it being most used in weather at the moment, is in data-driven numerical weather. So I've got the episode for that AI in the UK, because we talk about it a lot about in Europe, and it's too easy to remember to do it that way effectively. So numerical weather prediction is our standard way, our physical way of representing the atmosphere. That's just a computer program taking physics, taking from here and going to the next stage. How can we do that from an AI perspective? So in the Met Office, we're working with the Alan Turing Institute, the sort of national AI service, to look at how to use this in a data-driven world. So we take reanalysis data, we use that in the same way we do for any machine learning. That's our target, and we take the inputs beforehand and say the weather as it is in 6 hours is our target. Sorry, it's got a timing thing on it. We encode that into a graph neural network and say in 6 hours it's going to look like this. Take us forward. And take us forward again. Take us forward again. Effectively similar to how we do with our current ML4EO. Instead, this is being driven by data instead of us automatically writing out those equations, experimenting with different levels of doing them as well. Looking at it from that AI perspective, have the outcome, how can I train the model effectively to get to that outcome. And there's actually quite a few versions of these. Google have got a few coming out, have a few that have come out, for example, Crowdcast, Gencast. We have the Pangu model, which is out for quite a few years now. There's Microsoft's Aurora. There's AIFS, which is done by the European Centre for Numerical Weather Prediction. And then there's our version as well, which is then hoping to move into this higher resolution domain rather than the global one, which is where the reanalysis data works. There's other options as well. I have to be careful here because this is an NVIDIA core diff model, and I know there's someone from NVIDIA in the room, so I have to be polite. But effectively, this is taking core threads of global weather data and what we call downscaling it, giving it that extra level of detail by processing it through an AI system. The issue with all of these systems, not NVIDIA's on its own, but also the NWP versions, is they are effectively emulating something. So the reanalysis we have, that is a model reanalysis of the atmosphere. It's not exact truth. And we need to be aware in the AI world of what we're actually creating. We're creating an emulator of a different model. That is still valuable, but we need to know what we're actually doing. This is not exact truth. This, for example, is replicating a high resolution, I think it's 2 kilometre high resolution weather model, which is very, very powerful. But each of those models have their own biases in. We need to understand those as well. But also, this is a downscaling version. We need to understand better, does it downscale from particular models? So if then that base model changes, we're probably going to have to retrain to understand how this is going to work better in the future. But it still provides us valuable information. And the most important thing with all of these is the speed they work at. The fact that suddenly we can do this much, much faster, and you don't need a really powerful supercomputer to do it. Obviously you need many, many GPU hours to be able to train the thing. Once you've done that, you don't need the high performance computers as much to be able to run it for you. So what are the promises from AI in this area? There's, as I say, faster and more accurate predictions. Now, faster, absolutely agree. More accurate, I'm a bit on the fence. There are many, many papers, as we all know, where they talk about the accuracy and how it competes on WMO, which is the World Meteorological, was there a problem with that word? Organisation metrics, which are global metrics and can be done regionally as well, over the entire world. And it shows that these models are performing. They are performing as well as our state-of-the-art, or even outperforming some of them on these metrics. However, those metrics are not the weather as we live. As a user, I don't consider these good enough for me to do the work with yet. As an expert, I can get value from them, but I would not replace my current versions of NWP with one of these models yet, not by a long shot. There's a lot more work to be done in that space before I am willing, as an expert operational meteorologist, to say, yes, I would take that and do my downwind forecast just from that data. I want the physicality as well. There's this democratization of weather. So the idea that suddenly everyone can create one. And that is true, you can make your own, but I think there's a lot to be thought about within there as well. How revolutionary actually is this? So there's still a significant tech barrier to this democratization. Now, we can get on a computer notebook and run AIFS, which is the ECMWS model, online and get the output from it. But why is that any better than just getting their data from their website? Because I'm just doing the same thing. If I want to then fine-tune it and make more changes to that, I need more and more skills to be able to do that. So it's lowered the barrier to entry a little bit, but there's still a lot to be done to get to that final process of making it better. So whilst it's allowing more people to do this, I think there's less democratization than we may feel. And we are already doing what we already do, just we're doing it faster. And that comes with its own problems as well, of how do you consume that much information? At what point can I still make these decisions, given that I know in 20 minutes I'm going to have more information? When do I actually make my decisions within this whole flow of information? And there's also, and this is my biggest issue with it, the ability for proliferation of misleading output. So because we can have other people, other actors, people who are not, shall I say, national Met Services, who have a responsibility to their government and their people, they don't have, other people don't necessarily have that responsibility, so they can do what they like, they can say what they like. And this is taken from a website I shan't name because that's not fair, but they have said that they have a highly advanced AI weather model that can do predictions up to 4 months in advance, or 6 months in advance. Very nice of them. So I did this in late May for Exeter. There's not much difference in each one of those. It's always going to be cool, apparently, with an average daily high of 18 or 19 degrees and an average daily minimum of 11 or 12. Okay, I'd argue that you're just telling me that's the climate of Exeter effectively, and there might be rain. It's in the UK. There always might be rain. That's just the way it is. That is of no use to anyone. Someone's going to pay for that because they've sold it really well. And that's the danger here, is that people will oversell and they will do really good jobs of doing that. But we, as national Met services, cannot fall into that trap of only selling things. We have to have our scientific integrity, and we have to have scientific robustness behind it. Because what we are delivering is effectively safety of life services to the UK. We need to do this right. The other problem is there is just more data. And if I need to translate all this data into information and insights, that's just more and more work for me to do. And that's where I think we need AI, is to help us with that cognitive load rather than just AI will do it for us. And the most important part to me is that I think we still need to focus on this human-to-human element. Until we are prepared at some point to just go, data comes out here, goes through this pipeline to the end, and decisions are made purely by computers on both sides. If we're ready to delegate authority to say that's what's happening, then fine. You don't need meteorologists, you don't need the human. As soon as a human is involved in that decision-making process, I think you need humans all through it. Because the important part is being able to talk to someone, get that intangible feeling from talking to people about their expertise. It either gives you more confidence in it, or you can understand what the confidence is changing. And getting that from a computer model is not the same. So I don't think this is a replacement. I think whilst humans are making any sort of decisions, we need humans at all parts of this change. It's a nice little fun. What do I think this means for operational meteorology? Is it freedom? Is it destruction? Are we going to be released from all of this and we can just sit back and go, yeah, computer's doing it's all brilliant, and just having a light touch approach? Or is it destruction? Are we out the door because suddenly we're not needed anymore? Again, computers will do it for me. Computer says no. I don't think either of those is true. There's been talk from recent years about the fourth industrial revolution, and the fact that in all of these, jobs have changed. They've evolved. There are more jobs now than there ever were before because there's more people in the world. We've all, hopefully, fairly gainfully employed. I don't see that changing now. AI is revolutionary in certain aspects, but I don't necessarily see it as more revolutionary than the Industrial Revolution as a whole. And that just changed the world. It is going to be hugely disruptive, but I don't think we're moving to the stage of universal basic income or something like that, because AI will do everything for us. I think there's still huge value in the roles as they stand now, and making sure we're an active participant in the evolution of these roles in the future. Well, I've come to the idea of data volumes, because this is one of the big issues for me. The Met Office takes in 215 billion weather observations every day. So quite a few observations, right? And we can't use all of those because there's just too many. So we have complicated programs that use some of them, or where they're most useful all the time. But with all of that, we also create over 100 terabytes of information a day. When compared to things like Facebook, all right, it's not huge amounts of information, but it's still a lot of information for people to try and process and understand. And this comes down to ideas of deterministic and ensemble data. So deterministic is, this is the weather, this is how it's going to evolve, and that's it. Ensemble is our recognition that that's not how weather works. We don't have a perfect representation of what the atmosphere is at the starting point, and we also don't have a perfect understanding about how the weather evolves. So we need to alter things subtly to understand how things might change. And it's also linked to the idea of chaos theory. Actually, you take two parcels, you release them at very slightly different information, they will diverge chaotically at some point. That's the sort of system we are dealing with here. We're dealing with these concepts of chaos in the weather system. Now, what does that mean to me? So I envisage this as kind of a data river to me as an operational meteorologist. There is a constant flow of information. It's all in one place, always coming past me, it's always changing. That's observations, that's model data, that's even social data, demographics, what events are going on, what time of day is it, how many people are moving around, is it a bank holiday, is it not? All that sort of information, but also potential impact data, because that affects your decisions as things change. When impacts start to come in, and I then give more information to say, this is starting to happen, and now this is going to be exacerbated by the continuing weather, or is it going to get better? There were examples a few years ago where we forecast the winds correctly, or as correctly as you can say you can in a meteorological perspective, but we start seeing more impacts than we were expecting. And those winds are only going to continue to progress further northeast. So admittedly, where we start to see the impacts, we had a warning out, but we then upgraded for the areas that haven't seen them yet, because we could give them more information and say, what's happening here is about to move towards you, so you can take some action to understand that. However, there is only so much data we can access. I can't do 215 billion observations a day. My brain won't cope. or 100 terabytes. Can't do it. So we need to know what data we need to access and when. So operational meteorologists are very, very good, and tooting our own trumpet, we are very good at this. We know what the informative data is, and we ensure we access the right data at the right time. But the volumes of data are, again, always increasing. New tools, new diagnostics are being developed. So how do I bring that into my data set? Again, I think that's where AI can have a place. It's telling me what data I could be looking at this time. I'm retaining the decisions. I'm retaining the ability to access all this data. But this system is acting to say, have you looked at this? Because that's effectively what my colleagues are doing. There's something there that can access everything and go, have you seen this bit of data you don't often use, but in this situation it could be really valuable. So what about the hype of AI? And I think this is an important one. People have probably seen the Gartner curve at times. This idea of you have a technology trigger, we have a peak of inflated expectations, and then it'll plummet down into this disillusioned trough. And actually, eventually we end up in a nicely productive manner where we are not fully meeting that hype. However, AI being so fast moving as it is, I don't think we ever get away from that thing. Because as soon as we start using something, we start to think, oh, this isn't delivering what I want. Someone's come out with a new thing. There's a new part of AI going, oh no, we can do all this. We think about it in terms now as large language models or agentic AI and the emergence of all of that. It's just pushing us back up that peak. And we're not actually thinking about how much of this is making it downstream to us. How much of this are we actually using in our day-to-day lives? Obviously, as people who are active in this space, we're aware of it. I've got co-pilots and things on my phone that I like to use, but up to a point, kind of toys, not actually helping my life that much. It's like a fancy search engine half the time, just allows me to get data a little bit quicker. So it is helping, but it's not as revolutionary as it could be. There's so many ideas coming out, and they're all going into this sort of innovation type funnel. They're all coming, going, this is brilliant, this is the next big thing, look at what's going on. But actually, the amount of papers I see published in the weather domain, and the amount of new information that come out coming out of new models that we see talked about in the AI world, how many of them actually get down to benefiting me and my work? I would argue very, very few. Actually get to this point where I can say, this model is making either my life easier or helping me make better decisions, and therefore helping the UK stay safe and thrive, which is part of the Met Office's vision. I don't think many actually make it through there. But there's such a volume of talk about it and such hype about AI, from governments and from tech companies at the moment, that it's so easy to get caught up in all of that and not actually think about, is this really helping me at the moment? I see that in the future we need to maintain specialists in control. There's this disconnect that I've just talked about between hype and the actual usage. So much information coming in and we're not actually getting the benefits out of it. What we need to look at is our user and our customer focus. What is it our users and customers need? That's an important one because needs and wants are different. What is it they actually need? In order to engage with them, sometimes you need to give them a little bit of what they want as well, because that helps engage them in the process. And then we also have to have that understanding. What is actually possible with this? But also, really importantly, how does it work? Why is it doing this? And that's where we come to this most important part to me, is trust and understanding. So I've shamelessly stolen this from a LinkedIn post by a lady called Maria Sukareva, where she used prompt from one of the ChatGPT models to create a map. And I think it's done the rounds on LinkedIn and other sites a while. Looking at that, you first look at it as, oh, that looks all right. And then you look at it a bit closer and think, I've not heard of some area called Barrett in France. I'm pretty sure the west of Scotland doesn't look quite like that. I don't think Denmark and Sweden are connected quite in that way. And the more you look at it, the more you think, all right, this isn't quite right. It's done quite a nice job of replicating an image or an idea of what a map looks like, but it's not all there. But that's not a real danger. It's just a map of Europe. I'm not going to make any big decisions based off that. And we know that that is not quite right. So as experts, or even as casual users, we know that's not quite right. What if we start working in things like the medical domain? I don't know anything about what the heart's called. That looks plausible to me until you start to look closely. You've got at least two tricuspid valves which are pointing in different parts. I don't know the impacts of all of that. But suddenly, that becomes quite dangerous in the hands of someone who's not thinking straight, not sense-checking what they're coming out. Fortunately, again, as experts, we're looking at this and going, I know what AI can do, so I'm always a little bit suspicious. I'm always checking on this. If you're not going to check that, at which point that leads you into dangerous potential territory. And it's that sort of thing that I'm now concerned about with AI, is the proliferation of the power. If you don't have expertise, suddenly you can end up in quite bad places. It's like asking a meteorological question in Copilot. I do that quite a lot. But I assess the answer. I can immediately read it and go, that's rubbish. Or, oh, no, that's good, that's going to lead me down to a bit of research I need to do. I like it. But I can recognise that. If I don't work in that domain, if I don't have that expertise, I don't know it's rubbish. At what point am I just going to commit and say, yeah, that's fine? And that is where the danger, I feel, lies. This is where it comes on to things like explainable AI and what I've termed scientific candor. We are all guilty of overselling, I would argue. When we publish papers, focus on the good. That's sort of hidden over there somewhere, because you want to get an impact towards it. But we're giving this big thing of this is how good it is. The real understanding of performance is vital, because we need to understand how it forms in different situations to have this informed decision making. I've got examples of like layer-wise relevance propagation in an operational meteorologist context, showing that in these images, it's highlighting the areas I would look at as a human to be able to understand what's going on. So that gives me some measure of trust in the system. I've got things like diffusion matrices. I can understand that this is an over-predicted model, but it captures most of the events. That is important information I need. So as an expert using these models, I need to know where they do well, where they don't do well. I need that information being given to me. And there's no point in just saying, this model's great, because I've been stung before. I'm not going to believe you unless you're honest and open about what's coming out of this model. We're talking about foundation models at some point, and I don't want to dismiss them. They are brilliant things, but there are dangers associated with them. Such as large language models, ChatGPTs and all that. They can be simple to apply to specialist problems, and we're exploring it in the metaverse and looking at how we put data into LLMs and then get some descriptions of the weather out of that. So it can be quite simple to apply. You can just do it in prompt. Here is the weather for the day. Describe this to me as if I'm an expert in meteorologist. The outputs can superficially look really good, and you can be, again, a less scientifically integral organisation. You could just say that looks good enough, I'm going to use it. But as an expert, I don't know why the model's given that answer. I don't know how much credence it's put into my answer. I need to know that. I need to reassure myself either over a very, very long time period of doing this, and that's what we've done with ML4EO. We've used it for 30, 40 years. We know how that performs, so I need that level of confidence in these models before I'm willing to use them effectively. And it's that we need to build up. And again, that comes back to this honest trust part. I need to know where it's good, and I need to know where it's bad, so I know when I need to intervene. Effectively, when are we prepared to delegate authority to these models? Because that's the AI push, I suppose, at the moment, is how much of this can I use? At what point are we prepared to say that's okay? And it may be the case that when there are no impact, when the weather is relatively quiet, like it is now, nice and hot and sunny, I'm prepared to models to sort of go off on their own, because they're just going to say it's warm and sunny out there. But I still need to be careful. When it's warm and sunny, there are different sorts of threats. It's not necessarily directly from the weather, but there's always people who jump into a quarry of water because they're very, very hot and they're not prepared for cold water shocks. How do we communicate that as well, rather than a large language model potentially saying, why don't you go out and cool yourself off with a nice sized dip? That's potentially dangerous. Does that come back on us and giving that information? And finally, what does all this mean? For me, I think it's the importance of our specialists actually grows. So this is in a meteorological lens. Back in the 1960s, people were king. We hadn't had people really. We didn't have NWP. That's when it started. But over the years, we've developed more and more powerful NWP, and data has become more and more important. It's become more and more accurate. But we have always been, as meteorologists, sort of the guardians of that data. We've had it, we've created it, and then we've shared it. It's bit by bit to the other community. That's changing now with the emergence of the AI weather model. Suddenly, everyone can run their own AI weather model. They can drive it themselves. They, and I'm using they broadly, because I've seen it in the world. I'm not saying everyone does it, but some will be slightly disingenuous and say, oh, weather model performs this brilliantly. It may not be their weather model, it may just be AIFS, for example. And they've taken it from papers. But that's not actually how well it's performing for your needs. It's just a broad metric that they can say. And they can sell it like that, and it might work for their business model. But for us as experts, it's not quite true. It allows for, again, this proliferation of misleading output, for poor decision making, too much data out there. And I'm not saying we're going to stop that. We shouldn't stop that. We should allow other people to run it. What I think now is, with all that increase of data, actually, it's our people and our expertise that become the most valuable part. We are going to keep people coming back to us as the Met Office, as the National Met Services, as experts, because we understand this data. We know why something is happening. We give you that extra layer of confidence after it, that quality assurance about you can make this decision because this is correct, or this is going to go wrong because of this, or this is the things you need to be worried about in this situation. We have that through expertise, through experience, that other people don't necessarily have. And I think that's going to become more and more important. Increasingly as well, we already start to see some sort of turn of tide of people want that human touch. In an increasingly automated world, there's a bit more of a push to actually, what becomes more valuable now is that human element. We need to make sure we are feeding into that. This is the idea of we want support, not replacement. In a parallel to a medical field, there we have abilities to suggest diagnosis, power through huge volumes of images to say this person may have this disease. But the human retains that final decision. And that's what I think we want, particularly in these higher impact sort of edge cases, extreme weather scenarios. We don't want the AI version of Googling your symptoms. That would be terrifying to me. I would have horrible diseases every day of the week by just putting something to Copilot. And already, they have those guardrails to say, I'm not qualified to do this. But we don't have that for meteorology yet. Perhaps we do. We need those sorts of things. I think we need more specialist modelling. So NWP, yes, that's specialist up to a point, but again, that's data, not the outcome. So we need to train in our specific domain. I've heard of this concept of industrial foundation models recently. I think, basically, and I'm going to say this is exactly what it is, because I don't understand it fully, but it's basically using our proprietary understanding, our data, to fine-tune these models, to make sure that they are working directly on our ideas. Because at the moment, all these foundation models, or LLMs, for example, they're trained on a huge corpus of data. But you don't use it in that way for medicine at the moment. There's far more doctors in the world than one meteorologist. So there is less information about explicit meteorology within there. So we need to put more of that in, but we're only going to be able to do that ourselves by publishing all of this. And there's this large overheaded development. What we need is our co-pilots to be specialists for us. I want someone who can work with me to help. I have colleagues that can do that now, but they're also becoming really busy. So I want someone who can say, as I said earlier, have you seen this bit of data? Have you thought about looking at this? It's a very difficult balance to trade, so obviously I don't want them to constantly do that, because then I'll get really annoyed and I'll turn it off. But the ability to say, this is very valuable, you should be looking at this, or at least push data towards them and say, this is already here. Pre-populate things, so I don't have to go and do searching for data. It's faster for me, but I can still retain control. We need these iterative benefits. I think it's really important from a trust point of view. If we jump to these large-scale projects, it's quite risky. They may or may not work. We're not sure. Probably will if you put enough resource into it. But we need to deliver these smaller-scale benefits on the road to build trust in the usability of these systems. If I just suddenly had a nice, beautifully fine-tuned large language model on weather data, and then I gave that to all of my colleagues, I'm pretty sure most of them wouldn't use it because they don't trust it. Whereas when I start building up the idea of using AI now in smaller bits that I can prove the value of, people are more likely to bring in these more complex models in the future. And it's hard to just jump straight to there. Going back to this concept of a data river, I think of it as sort of an operation meteorologist as a fisherman. I've got this river, and I know when the valuable information is, so I go there. And I need the AI to say, actually, not today. The most valuable data is over here. You need to go there. You need to understand why that data is valuable and use it to support my decision making. So I think our role evolves rather than changes. We want to maintain the value of these specialist real-time applications, this assurance step, understanding what this means for us as a public. But we also have this emergence of a role as curators of training data in our specific domains to make sure that these models are then specialists in our field as well and continue to evolve in the way that we want. Some of what we're exploring in the Met Office at the moment, for example, is replicating forecaster intuition for warnings. So Using high-value parameters, again, those high-value features, to understand the risk of hazards over the UK. A good meteorologist knows that if you give me a couple of high-value parameters, I can tell you what the weather's going to do broadly over the UK. I don't have exact fine details, but I know broadly what's going to happen. You get a machine learning model to do that as well. So that then points out you're going to be busy these days because there's a lot of hazards coming up, or this is going to be nice and quiet. What data then is associated with that to make further decisions? It's that sort of shortcutting I want to explore. I want to understand our language and the connections between that language and our hazards. So we have a good corpus of 10 years or so of expert weather assessments written every day about the weather over the UK. Do a network analysis of this meteorological language to understand what specific language we are using in those documents, what hazards that relates to, and relate that to our weather parameters for prediction. And then we link that back to these data sources. So we're saying, I have this data, these are our hazards, these are the sources of information you may want to help you make your decisions. I'm not excluding any data, I'm not saying don't look at this, I'm just making sure that this is front and centre because this is what we feel is highest value. I'm at the moment working with some colleagues from the University of Exeter on risk-based decision making. So this is reinforcement learning-based decision making, accounting for different sources of vulnerabilities and risk influences, such as physical, socio-economic, community preparedness and recovery capacities. Can we use that to understand what actual things we should be thinking about when we're thinking about hazards? We can see the relationships, or we can learn the relationships between these factors, so we know in this situation the vulnerability is really important, or in this situation actually that's not important, we should be focusing on something else. Conclusions from all of this, and I'll finish up now so you can AI is very, very powerful, but we need to approach it with caution in our specialised professions. And we must maintain trust in our professions whilst embedding this AI usage. If we lose that trust, it's gone. We're not getting it back. And this requires open communication of how these tools perform. We need that explainability. We need to really understand what they are doing to be able to use them effectively day to day. And these tools, they need to support and not supplant our specialists. Don't want to get rid of our roles. I accept our roles are changing. We should influence how they change. We shouldn't be thinking, oh, we don't need them in the future. Ever since I've been in meteorology, which unfortunately is like 20-something years, there's always been someone saying, we won't need forecasters in 5 years because the model hasn't happened yet. There's different powers in AI. I'm reluctant to then say, oh yeah, this time it's different. Obviously there's dangers of saying this time it's not different. But I've seen it enough times, I don't believe just more compute power, which is effectively what we're doing here, will solve that problem. We need to engage with curating data for these models in the future so that we direct them. And we'll only do that if we're delivering what specialists actually need for their roles. So we're focused on what these specialists need to make those decisions in order to support their roles. If we don't do that, I don't think AI will deliver for us, but what will happen is our role will not change, we will not engage, and eventually our role will disappear and we'll be the poorer for it. You'll be happy to know that's it from me. So if there's time for questions, and there may not be, feel free. Otherwise I am around for the rest of the day, so feel free to grab me. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions. While we are answering the questions, the next speaker can come to make preparation.
Thank you. That really resonated with me. Kind of the same thoughts in my space. And I just wondered, do you feel pressured to use some of these tools? And if so, do you have any processes for like making decisions about which ones you try? Because they're just proliferating at such a rate.
I feel a huge amount of pressure, but part of that is self-enforced in a way. And I feel if I don't keep up with the latest thing, I'm just going to be overtaken. But at the same time, I think it's important to think that the newest tool, or the most powerful tool, is not necessarily a solution. I'm trying to explain to people where I work and other things about data science as a continuum. The simplest approach may well be the most valuable. There's no reason to go, we need an LLM, we need a deep neural network for this. If there's a simpler solution, even if it's just an Excel spreadsheet that can do this, we should use that, because that makes more sense, rather than just jump into the whole thing. So I see AI at the moment as this all-encompassing tool, but actually underneath it, you can get away with a lot, and obviously you're badging it with AI, which is slightly dodgy. In terms of decision making, we are still trying to figure out what is the best approach. In terms of the NWP side of it, that's much more mature. Graph neural networks, I think, are the big thing and have been for a couple of years, and they are what's being worked on. In terms of the human decision making, I think it's still open to what's the best approach, and that's why we're exploring kind of as many as we can. But I accept at some point we're going to have to say, no, we need to go down this route. We are trying to explore what's the best way to innovate in this space, because I think that's going to be really important, is giving people the power to, buzzwords ahoy, fail fast, but actually do that, and actually constrain it to, you have a couple of weeks, try something. Is there any promise? If not, stop, I'm going to try something else. And also making sure we capture the lessons learned from that. So when someone thinks about it again in 6, 12 months, we've tried this, this is the problems. What is different with your approach that means that we're not just going to do that again? So it becomes innovation with some light touch governance, and I always see it as we need very light touch governance to start, and that has to build as you go up through the sort of product chain, because obviously when you want to release something in the end, you need huge governance around it.
Thank you.
Hi. So there's been a lot of articles recently in the press about how large language models and foundation models are increasingly creating junk and poor data, which is increasingly being used to train them, and thus making them even worse. Do you see that as being a particular trend in meteorology, especially with sort of, people's differing views on climate change and such like?
I don't see it at the moment, because we are still training on physical model outputs. So we've got ERA 5, which is the sort of gold standard output on truth in inverted commas. It's not truth, it's the model, but this is what we train all our NWP output on, and that's a physical model. And we at the Met Office, at least, and I think other companies as well, are still very much seeing as we are looking at a hybrid approach. Physical modelling has so much more to give, but it's still very difficult. The air models can shortcut other parts, and there's going to be, probably next year and the year after, there is a new version of ERA coming out, which is going to be higher and higher resolution, and I expect to see suddenly a huge glut of other models that have trained on all of this. I won't be able to get at that data because all the other companies will come in and hoover it up as quickly as possible, and I just won't be able to get in the door. And then they will see improvements. But at the moment, we are not seeing in the meteorology domain this proliferation of dodgy Gen AI stuff. That will come, but I hope, and I'm trying to make sure it doesn't come from National Met Services. It will come from other services, like that one I showed, and again, I'm not going to know who they are, that's not fair. But they are saying, we have our advanced AI weather model that can do 4 months prediction. It's just like, that's all the detail you've given. I'm pretty sure you're using some weird climate prediction, and you've got the ChatGPT on the end of it, but that's your AI weather model. And that's what we're going to be fighting against in the future. Anyone can do that, anyone can say they're brilliant. We are the ones who can say, I don't believe that, in the nicest possible way. The reasons are this is what you should use instead, because we are the experts. That is not a very difficult one to do, because obviously we don't want to say as a national organisation, that's rubbish. But yeah, I don't see the problems of Gen AI produced poor training data in the meteorology domain as yet, so I'm sure it will come.
Thank you. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Steve will be with us during the coffee breaks and will be around. Just try to find